Hello, welcome back to the second part of Lockdown Money Live from the UK Money Bloggers community. We are basically a group of people who are passionate about helping others with their finances through blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels, Instagram channels, all sorts of things. We do it for free because we love it. Sometimes it's our full-time job. And that's actually the case with both Naomi and I, who are your hosts for tonight. My name's Andy Webb. I run the blog and the website Be Clever With Your Cash. Should remember what it is, shouldn't I? And here is Naomi.
Hello everyone, my name is Naomi Willis and I run Skint Dad with my husband.
So this is the second session of tonight. If you missed the one at 6 o'clock, don't worry, you can watch it over on the UK Money Bloggers Facebook page or the Skint Dad Facebook page on Catch Up. There will also be, if you head to ukmoneybloggers.com/lockdown live, you'll be able to get more information about how to get not just all the videos from tonight, but also any extra resources, some of the things we've spoken about, which will be emailed through to you. So do check that out if you want to do that and make sure you don't miss out. So we've got a couple more sessions after this, but this one is with me. So I'll say goodbye to Naomi for now, but you'll be back with any questions that anyone has. Actually, where's the best place for people to leave questions?
So I'm going to be on Facebook watching what's happening. So if you're on the UK Money Bloggers Facebook page, the Skint Dad Facebook page, or if you're in one of the Skint Dad groups, either Reduce Your Supermarket Spend or the Skint Dad Community Group, I'm going to be in there monitoring what you're saying and what you're asking. So if you have any specific questions based on what's raised here, then ask your questions and they'll be able to answer them at the end for you.
Fantastic. Right, we'll see you in a bit. So this session is all about your job and your pay. We know, because we're 3 months essentially, aren't we, into this now, since a lot of these announcements were made about certain schemes. You're probably already on the receiving end of a lot of them. But we're going to go over these in a moment in a bit more detail about where they are. But also we're going to look at what's next. Now, some of this is going to be speculation, unfortunately. We had hoped to hear this week that we would find out what's happening next in terms of more detail on furlough and maybe some news around the self-employment schemes. We've heard a lot of rumours, but I think the Dominic Cummings affair has kind of pushed it back. It'll probably happen tomorrow, which would be a lovely gift for the weekend, won't it? But anyway, we're going to go through what's happening right now, what possibly could be happening next with your job. So the furlough scheme, self-employment schemes, and potentially redundancy as well. But I'm not doing this on my own. I am joined by the fantastic Faith Archer, who is a personal finance journalist herself, but also a blogger over at Much More With Less. How are you doing, Faith?
I'm doing all right. Hi, Andy.
I'm going to show everyone your blog. I've made it work this time. So here we go. They can see the website here. There's a lovely picture of your dog.
Oh, yes. Very recent acquisition, luckily just before lockdown in February.
Very handy indeed. So, Faith, let's kick off things now by talking about the furlough scheme. Now, This is officially known as the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. 8.4 million people have already been furloughed, which is a huge proportion of the workforce. Apparently, it's around 70% of companies have used the scheme so far for at least some of their staff. Some people it might be everyone, some people it might just be a handful, but it is huge. What is it? Can you run everyone watching through how this works? I guess let's start with who's able to get it.
Well, the furlough scheme was put into practice so that the government would help employers to pay wages even when their staff could not work. And so it is run by your employer. It's for people who are on PAYE, pay as you earn. So that's going to be normal employees, and also people if you work through an umbrella company, for example, supply teachers. And the way it works is that you get paid 80% of your wages by the government, capped at £2,500 a month, and then it's up to your employer if they're going to top it up to the normal amount that you would get. And when I say 80% of wages, that's kind of based on your regular guaranteed money. So if there is discretionary payments, things like commission, tips, discretionary bonuses, they aren't included in the calculation.
Yeah, there are a fair number of complications when your job isn't paid normally, 0-hour contracts, for example, all this kind of thing. Now, because we are, I guess, so far into the scheme, most of the people who are going to be on it will probably know, but that doesn't mean new people won't be added. You might still be added, I guess, at some point. It's unlikely as we're trying to move back towards businesses opening much up more, people going back to workshops opening, but there is still a chance of that. And ultimately, it's a decision of the employer, isn't it? If you are furloughed or not.
Yes, it is. It's up to the employer. And it's tricky for them, because if they're going to put staff on furlough, you cannot work. You can't continue working for your employer. So it's that, and that is one of the new developments that's being discussed, because originally the furlough scheme was only meant to last for 3 months. And the Chancellor has announced it's going to be extended right through the end of October. And we're waiting for news of exactly what the changes will be. But one of them potentially after August might be that employees can start perhaps going back to work part-time, but still remain getting some support from the government on the furlough scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when it was first launched, it was meant to be for 3 months. So March, April and May. It's already been extended once until the end of June. So where we are now at the end of May, there is at least one more month where if you are furloughed and your employer wants to keep furloughing you, that can carry on, as you discussed, 80% of your salary, up to $2,500, funded by the government, and perhaps more if the employer wants to. Now, it was a week ago now that the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, did say it is going to be extended until the end of October. Which I think is fantastic news and a big relief for lots of people. And he said there would be more information this week. We haven't had it yet. So as I said at the top, that's a bit frustrating. I think to literally let people know just before the weekend is a bit unfair, because we don't know how it's going to work. But there have been kind of briefings that have gone out. There are various articles which the speculation on this at previous stages has been quite accurate. So we do know, like you say, a good chance that people, well, we know, he said himself, we know people will be able to go part-time with this. So whereas before you couldn't work at all if you were furloughed, it's now going to be a situation where you can work part-time and receive some of your income furloughed. What are the other kind of rumours that the speculation, but essentially we think are going to happen?
Well, the Chancellor had made it clear that from August, he is going to expect employers to contribute, to kind of share in the costs of the scheme. What he hasn't been clear about is exactly what that share is going to be. But there is a suggestion that the government might drop down from providing 80% of wages to maybe providing 60% of wages, and expecting the employer to top up the 20%, that chunk up to the 80%.
Because it's not that furlough suddenly becomes 60%. There is absolutely that. Furlough is still 80%. That's what we're thinking, isn't it? So you will still get that 80%, but your employer has to pay potentially 20% of that. Again, how that works with this idea part-time, I don't know. Whether it's meant essentially if you're working part-time, that goes towards it, or whether this is the hours that you're furloughed, still 20% of that will need to be paid from by your employers, which is, I think, probably the most likely option there. There's other thing that's interesting about this. Obviously, part-time, potentially good news for people who want to get back to work, good news for employers who want to get people doing something. But there could well be a cut-off as well.
I think this is the idea that up to now, employers can add staff to the furlough scheme as and when they want, providing that they are putting staff on the scheme for a minimum of 3 weeks. There is a suggestion that they won't be able to keep adding staff to the furlough scheme forever and ever. And we're waiting to find out when that cut-off point might come. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I've not liked some of the generally in the right-wing papers, this sort of talking about people being addicted to the scheme and weaning people off, because it has been, I think, a vital thing to help people have some money right now when otherwise they may well have lost their jobs. But it is costing a lot of money, so they will be thinking very carefully about what they can do right now to make sure it's costing them less money and put that onus on others. So this idea that if things are going all right for you now, but they potentially, as an employer, I suppose, things have a downturn, maybe a second spike or whatever, it could be that's it. You can't add new people to the scheme. And at the moment, you could say 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. I do wonder whether once you've been taken off furlough, when this cutting comes out, again, you probably won't be able to put back on it. It will be kind of you're on it, you're part-time on it, or you're off it. And that's something that carries on.
I think there is no doubt that the furlough scheme has been an enormous help to companies that were in difficulty. And what we will have to wait and see as time goes on and as the furlough scheme is scaled back is how many of those companies don't survive or actually do have to lay people off in the end.
Yeah. Let's get on to that in a second. One thing I do want to quickly touch on, though, you mentioned obviously if you are furloughed or you could still become furloughed, you can't work for your employer. Obviously, the part-time thing might change that. But that doesn't mean you can't actually earn any money elsewhere. What exactly are the rules there if you're furloughed in terms of working?
Well, certainly you're free to volunteer. So maybe you want to start doing the track and trace call handling. But otherwise, check your contract because you might potentially be able to find paid work elsewhere, provided your contract of employment allows you to. And the other option is side hustles. Can you do anything, earn any money from home? Have a good old declutter and flog some stuff on eBay. Are there other ways that you can think of to top up your income?
Yeah, so that's worth bearing in mind, I think. All right, so as you said, the idea of the furlough scheme to prevent people making firms redundant, and it has done a fantastic thing about doing that, a fantastic job again to do that. But when these new contributions come in, and if employers decide they can't afford to make that 20% of the furlough amount of money, or perhaps just generally the business isn't going to survive, it's struggling, the demand's not there, particularly in that hospitality and travel industries you'd expect, then sadly I think redundancies, they are going to happen. We know already EasyJet, BA, Rolls-Royce, they have announced these job cuts, even though they've had people on furlough for months. Mm-hmm. And more firms, big and small, they are going to follow suit. Now, because being on furlough doesn't mean you will lose your job. If there are redundancies where you work, just because you've been furloughed, it doesn't mean that means you're next in line, okay? But it also doesn't protect you as well. Just because you're on furlough doesn't mean if there are job cuts that you can't be one of those people who is let go. I think it's a horrible phrase, actually, let go. One of those people who is made redundant. Mm-hmm. And just because just because your firm currently has got you on furlough doesn't mean they are struggling. It might just be that the restrictions in place have temporarily limited the business, and maybe they can just go back to normal and you will go back to normal and everything will be okay. But I do think it's important that people understand what their rights are in terms of redundancy, because this could come if you're employed right now, this potentially could come to pretty much anyone. So whether you're furloughed or not right now, Faith, what does the law say in terms of notice? How quickly, I guess, could redundancy happen?
You do have to have some notice. And this is going to depend partly on how long you've been employed by the company and how many people they are making redundant. So if you have been employed fairly recently, so 1 month to 2 years, then you're only actually entitled to a minimum of 1 week's notice. But if you've been around for longer, you get 1 week's notice for every complete year that you've been employed, up to a maximum of 12 weeks. And the other thing to bear in mind that if the company is making more than 30 people redundant within, I think it's a 3-month window, they have to have some kind of collective consultation. They can't just pull you in one by one. And if it is a bigger company making really big changes, more than 100 people, then they have to give 45 days notice, and they have to start discussions with staff and unions at least 45 days before the first dismissal. And I think that's part of the reason we've already seen the furlough scheme lengthened, because there might have been companies, if they could see the furlough scheme coming to a dead end, wanting to start those kind of negotiations and discussions in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has been kind of pushed off at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess when we do get more details about exactly what is happening in this the extended furlough scheme, I guess that will make some companies decide whether they're going to keep furloughing staff or whether to pull the plug, unfortunately, if that's where they see things going. If that does happen, if the company thinks, right, we aren't going to survive, and in fact redundancy, it's too late to make cuts, they go under, they go into administration or whatever happens, I mean, presumably, then there's little or no money available to give you a redundancy payout of any kind.
Well, don't despair. If the whole company goes bust, you can apply through the company liquidator so that you can still claim statutory redundancy pay and also some elements of wages, notice, holiday pay to the National Insurance Fund. So you will still, you should still hopefully get some money.
Obviously, that notice period becomes a lot shorter there if the company closes and doesn't exist anymore. Let's say that the company is existing, it's carrying on, it's giving you that sort of notice period, or the consultancy, whatever might happen, depending on the number of employees there are at your job. How much money could people expect to get, I guess, in terms of statutory? What's the legal minimum people will get if they are made redundant?
Well, the first point I was going to make is the legal minimum is just that. It is the minimum. So a first step might be to check your contract or check your staff handbook to see if your individual company offers a more generous scheme, or it may be that in the process of deciding to make people redundant, your company does offer more generous terms, particularly if they're offering voluntary redundancy. But when it comes to the minimums, again, this is going to depend on how long you've been working for the company, how much you earn, and how old you are. Now, the bad news is that if you have been employed by the company for less than 2 years, you are not entitled to any statutory redundancy pay. After that, you get half a week's pay for each year that you've been employed when you're under 22. You then get 1 week's pay for every full year you've been employed between the ages of 22 and 40. And over 40, you get a week and a half's pay for each year when you're 41 and over. Now, when I say a week's pay, that is the statutory week. It might not actually be how much you get paid. So the maximum is actually capped at £538 a week. Which is equivalent to £16,140 a year. So that might be quite a lot less than you actually earn.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the good news is that when it comes to statutory redundancy pay, or just any redundancy pay impact, £30,000 of that will be tax-free. You won't pay any income tax. You won't pay any national insurance on that. And you should be entitled to notice pay, such notice pay, and also any accrued holiday if you don't take that. But those two, any payment in lieu of notice and holiday pay, will be subject to income tax and national insurance.
Yeah, I had that when I used to work at the BBC, and for me it felt like a very good opportunity when a redundancy came along. I chose to take it, and I was able to get, they had a much better offering as a company than statutory pay, so I came out with more money. It was tax-free, which was fantastic. I had my notice, which, yes, I was paid for. Again, the NI and tax came off that. But I actually managed to negotiate a date with them as well. So I managed to get an extra day's holiday before I finished. So that added on, and I got paid for that as well. So you can, it's well worth, as you say, checking out that contract, checking out that staff handbook, find out now what's going on, just so you know. Because if you think you're in a vulnerable position, if you think your job potentially is at risk, and later on, we're going to talk about, well, Naomi's going to talk about how you stretch your money. But you could be in a situation where you're like, okay, I've got paid, I've got this payout, but it's got to last me a lot longer. So it's well worth knowing now if you think it's a risk, and maybe you can make some of those cutbacks. If potentially, I mean, this is for everyone, I think, as well, but particularly if you're in a situation where you're not as comfortable, you're not a big fan of your employer, shall we say, you think they might try and do something that's not necessarily in your best interests, and that might be perfectly for perfectly good reasons, because they're trying to run a business, they've got to keep it to survive. But is there anything people can do if they're particularly concerned about this? Things they can do in advance to maybe give them a little bit more protection, be armed a little bit better if those conversations come along?
One point would be to check, is there a union for your job, for your company? So is there a union rep that you could talk to, or a union you could join? The other people to talk to are ACAS. Now that's the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, and they are experts in this kind of employment situation and can provide support. One other thing, if you are going through redundancy, find out if you can get free legal advice. It might be included, for example, as part of your household insurance or part of an employee benefits package for you or your partner.
That's a good point, actually. There are a lot of these things you wouldn't imagine that they're in there, they're hidden away, you never use them, but actually they can be really useful to get that legal advice, and it's you paid for it, you may as well get it. I'm also glad that you said what ACAS stands for, so I didn't have to. Now, the furlough scheme, that is for people on PAYE. The redundancy process, that's going to affect people, again, who are on PAYE. There's a huge number of people who actually are self-employed in some variations, and there are lots of different variations of that. And when this all happened, when the furlough scheme was first announced, there was quite an outcry about how many people were left behind who weren't covered by that. It's difficult for the government to do everything, but there were a lot of people who were missing out. Now, they did come in then with a scheme which covers a number of those people, and it's called the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. Now, that went live just a few weeks ago on the 13th of May for people who were eligible. People who might not be sure about this or might be eligible and haven't gone through it yet, exactly what is it? How does it work?
It was designed for people, as it says, self-employed, but there were certain hurdles that you had to jump through. So you had to be self-employed before April 2019 because they wanted to see that you had submitted a 2018-29 tax return. So if you were self-employed more recently, no joy, you're not going to get any money from this. Also, it only applies if you make profits under £50,000 a year. And that was looking at either the 2018-19 timeframe, or if you'd been self-employed that long, it's the kind of the 3 tax years, 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, looking at the average across those. And I think, so 50,000 profits, self-employed, and the other aspect was that the majority of your income had to come from self-employment, because obviously there's some people where you have your paid job and you've got some self-employment on top of that, and that could have been quite a big chunk of your income. But if the self-employment side wasn't more than 50%, you didn't qualify for the scheme. Yeah. The good news in terms of what you actually got was that it was capped at £2,500 a month. And you got that paid as, it was meant to be 80%, it was calculated as 80% of your profits, capped at £2,500 a month. And you got one single lump sum that was meant to cover March, April and May. So it was only actually paid out. Hopefully if you've applied now, you might even have got your money already. I know I certainly have. And there isn't any news as yet that it is going to be extended any longer.
Yeah, that's one of the scary things, isn't it? It's March, April and May. May ends just in a couple of days when we're filming this right now. And there's been nothing. Whereas the Chancellor's come out and said there is going to be an extension to the furlough scheme with more details to come. Nothing at all. And I think hopefully we'll hear something tomorrow on Friday with more information, potentially next week. If they do it again in those lump sum packages, I guess there's time for it to come through again. Or they might feel that if you've got a 3-month package, that's enough to tide you through for a little bit anyway, because you've got it much later or getting it later anyway. If the news is bad and this is it and it's ended, what can you do if you're freelance? Where do you go next? And let's just say, even though restrictions are loosened, you can't go back to work. You're working in a bar, you're a wedding planner, so many jobs actually where the freelance market could still be restricted by lockdown.
I think what the government has been suggested, if your income's dried out but your bills haven't, is to look for universal credit. So websites such as Turn to Us or Entitled To, you can put in your details and see if you can claim universal credit and any other benefits. I think the drawbacks are that potentially if, for example, you're living with a partner who is still earning, you may not be eligible for universal credit. And if you have savings worth more than £16,000, you won't get universal credit either.
Yeah. One last thing to talk about actually with this scheme is you can still keep working. So unlike the furlough scheme, we have to stop working. You can apply for this grant, you can get it and carry on with your self-employment as it is, or potentially something else. But in theory, if you're running a business, it doesn't disappear. You can keep doing things.
Yes.
So as I said, that doesn't cover everyone who's self-employed. You missed out, like you said, if your profits were registered as higher than 50 grand either in that year or averaged over the 3 previous years. You missed out if you became self-employed early, at any point in that year because you didn't put in a tax return for that financial year. Or like me, many businesses and freelancers are set up as limited companies. So the bulk of pay there is then paid as dividends. And actually, that doesn't count. That's not one of the income that counts towards that scheme. And any salary you pay is probably quite low for the furlough. And actually, you have to stop working, which for self-employed people and company owners, that's very difficult. So all those people and others, they've missed out this duration, despite all the outcry saying, please help these people, support these people. Particular industries were probably affected more than others. There have been things like the business interruption loan scheme, which was fraught with all kinds of issues, wasn't really working, and it wasn't for everyone, mainly for sort of bigger companies there. And eventually the government, to try and appease this, they introduced the bounce back loans, which in principle have been, I think, quite a good thing to kind of help people through if they are struggling for cash flow, if you are self-employed or run a business. What are they? And I guess, how do people get them?
Well, if you want to borrow, then they are pretty attractive as commercial loans go. They were designed to be loans that were easy to apply for and very quick to pay out. So you can borrow between £2,500 and £50,000. That's capped at 25% of your annual turnover. And when I say turnover, that's kind of the big figure before you take the expenses off to get profit. You do not have to make any repayments or pay any interest for the first year. And then for years 2 to 6, you pay interest at a low fixed rate of 2.5%. And if your business perhaps is doing better than expected, it's kind of recovered from coronavirus issues, you can actually make early repayments without any penalty at all. So that is pretty good deal as a commercial loan, commercial loans go. I think the one point I would make is this kind of a one-shot deal. If you apply for a bounce back loan, you can't adjust the amount afterwards. So do make sure that you put down the right amount if you apply for one of these.
And I know you've applied for one of these, haven't you? How do people do it? Where do they go? What is the process?
Most of the big high street banks do offer bounce back loans. The place to check, the British Business Bank, there you go, there's a tongue twister, has a list of the accredited lenders. And the best place to go is if you already have a business account, so you've got an existing relationship. Check if your bank offers bounce back loans, because then you will have to go through fewer checks. You've got more chance of getting the money and getting the money faster. If you do not have a business account, if you're like me, I'm a sole trader, I've just been pottering along for all these years using a personal account, then your options are more limited. There is a much shorter list of banks that will either accept applications for business accounts from new customers or let you apply if you already have a personal account with that bank. I think about the only option, if you either don't want to open a business account or don't have an existing relationship with those few banks that will let you apply on the basis of a personal account, is HSBC. And the issue there is that so many people have applied to HSBC that you're not seeing the quick turnaround. You're not going to get your money in 2 or 3 days. Certainly I applied just over a fortnight ago for a feeder account, and that still hasn't actually been confirmed as opened.
Right.
So hopefully you will still get your money, but it could take longer.
Lovely. Thank you, Faith. That's fantastic. I know there are going to be people who have got very specific issues to them and their scenario, which probably might not have fitted into what we've said. So do a little bit more research if you do fit into any of those kind of like 0 hours, like we say, or different sort of contractual issues, or maybe issues with your employer. But it's one of these things that I think any support there is, it's there, and it's just going to start decreasing from now on. We're not going to see anything new unless, the whole situation with COVID gets a lot worse and something needs to be done in the longer term. But we are on the kind of the way out, so to speak, in terms of the financial support. At least that's where we are right now. Now, Naomi, I don't know whether we've got any questions. If I bring you back into the chat, any questions for Faith or myself?
Hello, everybody again. We have had a couple of questions, actually. I've had, I'm not going to name them, they've come to me privately. But a gentleman, I know you were just talking about the bounce back loans.
Yep.
And you've probably kind of really covered this already, but his bank doesn't provide them. And he wants to know what he can do. Is it worth him switching bank accounts and trying to go down that route, or is HSBC his only option?
What I'd suggest, I have got a post on my blog, Much More With Less, about bounce back loans, and that lists the short list of banks where, if, for example, he's got an existing personal account with a bank, they might let him use that to apply for a bounce back loan. So that, I'd say, is one option. But then after that, I fear he may end up falling back. HSBC is the fallback.
Okay. All right. And then we do have one more question. It's Track and Trace has launched today, and somebody has asked regarding kind of pay and what happens to that if they're told that they need to isolate for a couple of weeks. How are they going to get paid still?
If you are told you have to self-isolate, even if you don't have the symptoms, but you are told you have to self-isolate, it is treated as if you were ill. So you and ill due to coronavirus. And what that means is that you can claim statutory sick pay from your employer immediately on day 1 of absence rather than day 4. So good news, you might get a bit of money coming in, but it is limited money because statutory sick pay is limited to £95.85 a week, which may not go all that far.
No.
Yeah.
Well, lovely. Thanks for those, Naomi. And Faith, thank you so much. Just a quick reminder, if people do want to check out your site, where to go.
My blog is muchmorewithless.co.uk, and I've also got the Much More With Less Money Saving Year Facebook group if people want to ask any questions there.
Lovely. So do check that out. I'm also, as I mentioned at the top, if you go to ukmoneybloggers.com/lockdown live, you'll be able to sign up for essentially a little pack where I will link to things such as the blog post that Faith just mentioned and other things that we've spoken about. So you've almost like a little resource pack so you can get those in your inbox. So head over there to get those. Now, we are going to be back for the next session at 8:05 because obviously it is the final clap for the NHS, clap for carers at 8 p.m. So get out there, applaud those people who are on the front lines doing their best to kind of help people who do get sick with the virus. But then please do join us again at 8 o'clock. Naomi, do you want a quick preview of what that session is going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the clap, I'm going to be joined by Francesca from the Money Fox, and we're going to be talking about how you can stretch the money that you do have. So going back over some kind of frugal tips, things that you might already know about, but you just need a bit of a refresher and can start doing them again to really make sure that the money you get every payday lasts you the whole month, and hopefully with some left over so you can treat yourself or put it into savings.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching. And we'll see you in half an hour. Cheers.